We sit back and think about alcohol. We sit back and think about drugs. We sit back and think about, am I working too much? We do a little bit of that. I don't think we're yet at the point where it's like, what's the impact of this on intimacy in my home, of communication in my home? I worked in oncology for a decade, and what I learned from my cancer patients is relationships and the strength of those relationships are the things they value the most, and where their regret lies is in relationship.
This is Successfully Retired with Hamilton Brandenburg. Okay, have you ever felt awkward talking about sex with your partner or with your kids? Have you ever wondered why so many of us carry around shame when it comes to sex, intimacy, and even our own bodies, and where that shame actually comes from? Today's guest has spent her career answering those questions and many like them. Dr. Tina Schermer Sellers is a licensed psychotherapist, a best-selling author, and internationally recognized speaker whose work explores the intersection of sexuality, faith, parenting, and relational health. She's the author of Sex, God, and the Conservative Church and Shameless Parenting, and the founder of the Northwest Institute on Intimacy, where she trains clinicians to address sexual shame and trauma. As she puts it, sex is better without the shame. Dr. Tina, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Hamilton. It's so great to be here.
Well, it's great to have you. I've really been looking forward to this call. I know I had to reschedule it once over the December, and I was so disappointed to have to do that, but I'm so glad we circled back. I'm just going to start off with kind of a big question, maybe a loaded question, but for our listeners, let's just dive into it. What do you think is what is the primary purpose of sex on a fundamental human level? How does this fit into that big picture?
I have to say, Hamilton, that's one of my favorite questions. And I don't get asked it very often, but I think it's a profoundly important question. And I really wish there were more coffee table conversations about just this. What is the purpose? Like, let's put assumptions aside and just like with real curiosity. When you've worked with couples for as long as I have, individuals and couples, and around sexuality and sexual health, but also like what is thriving and what is intimacy, or why isn't this working? It should. I thought it would. I was told blah, 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 whatever. You come to that question. You come to that question over and over again. And I pretty soon into my career started asking people like who would be describing, sexual challenges and intimacy challenges. Like, okay, so just for a second, let's just throw away kind of what we know and ask ourselves, what is the human purpose in sex or sexuality? Why is it that we desire kinds of closeness that are intimate? Depending on what your flavors are, right? I remember the first time I asked that question, and this couple was like, well, I think it's like connection, like getting closer to each other and having fun, like pleasure, like enjoying each other. And I said, bingo, that's it. So if you come into the exchange of sexuality in some way with a different goal than that, I just want to make sure that we both feel more connected to each other and that we've shared some fun and some pleasure together. However we decide to, if you're going in with a different kind of goal, you're likely undermining what you actually, your heart and body and mind and soul most need. Which, when we define it that way, allows us to now have a banquet of ways with which we come to each other, and we get to talk about it. And what do you feel like? What do you have the energy for? Whatever. And it becomes a really delightful, fun way to play with somebody who's significant to you.
It's funny that I really love the way you answered that question of talking about, and I'll probably butcher it on the retelling, but like talking about using it as a way of connecting with somebody. So emotional connection or human to human true connection, kind of where you can at some level get beyond some of the walls and barriers that we build, and also do it in a way that's enjoyable for everybody. My wife and I recently went with some friends they wanted to go to, it was like a speakeasy kind of thing in Atlanta. And it was a lot of fun. It wasn't the kind of thing that she and I do like very often. It was like, there's like a dance floor and it's like 30 minutes to get to the bar to order a drink because it's so like cram packed. But it was funny, like to me, I'm kind of more of an introvert, even though it's a really fun scene. I'm more generally introverted. So I'm sitting like on the sidelines watching, and I'm like, I think everybody here is just trying to like connect with somebody and have fun. Like that's literally the whole point of this room, is like cram everyone together, get them dancing and moving, give them some booze so that they're a little socially lubricated, and that
Right.
they start to release some of these inhibitions and then start to have fun. And what was kind of sad was looking around the room, that now I'm going way off the tangent, and how many people I saw were just sitting in the corner like this. It's
Yeah.
AirPods in. I'm like, man, you're going somewhere to pay a cover charge, and you're just going to sit there and stare at your phone on a date with somebody, and they're doing the same thing. Like, that was
Yeah.
depressing.
Yeah.
And
But it is what we've been doing. We've been training
yes,
culture to distract themselves from uncomfortable situations. Being
wow,
in a
that's
room
huge.
of
Yeah,
people, and especially if you lean introverted or you don't know anybody, it's draining energy from you. It's not
yes,
giving energy to you until you make a meaningful connection. And we've been teaching people how to escape
yes.
hard feelings. And so these phones do that for people. But we end up short circuiting what, like you were saying, like our hearts and bodies really want. We really want to be seen. I always say humans want to be fundamentally
Yeah.
seen, known, loved, accepted.
Do you feel like with the rise of how easy it is to put technology and the entire world in our pockets, do you feel like that has shown up and manifested itself in new ways in the counseling relationships that you have with people, where you start to see this is actually something that's creating less intimacy, or has it just become a substitute for what we've always done, which is find easier ways to cope with our problems than to have honest conversations with each other, or uncomfortable conversations? Is it just kind of like the new flavor of the human month, proverbially, where like
Right,
this, or is it something that you feel like has actually made relationships worse as you are going through a counseling career and thinking back over
right, right.
interactions?
Yeah, I love that because I think it's a both and. I don't think it's an either or. I do think humans have had a tendency for when they're uncomfortable to distract themselves from that uncomfort or that discomfort. And really there's skills, literal skills that go into how to hold and ground yourself when you're uncomfortable, why
Yes.
you're doing it, learning to breathe through it and stay focused on that which you want. But we don't teach that typically. I mean, culturally, that kind of teaching often would fall in what in Scandinavia they call life education or family life education or sex education, because we're teaching emotional intelligence, relational intelligence, and body and sexual intelligence. So we don't do that here at all. In fact, we give religious education. We give abstinence only education, which is religious in our public schools. So that changes that. That's been always going on. But I think one of the things that current culture does and the influx of digital kinds of things, distractions, if you will, is yes, it's a flavor of the month, but it also means that we don't sit back and think about it. Like we
Yeah.
sit back and think about alcohol. We sit back and think about drugs. We sit back and
Sure.
think about, am I working too much? We do a little bit of that. I don't think we're yet at the point where it's like, what's the impact of this on intimacy in my home, of communication in my home, or whatever, or of just being out in the breeze, out in the woods, out in something other than in your home playing video games. And again, I'm not trying to put those things down. I just think they need some real conscious, focused thought, because all of us are going to get to the end of our life and we are going to look back and ask ourselves what's most important.
Mm.
And what I worked in oncology for a decade, and what I learned from my cancer patients is relationships and the strength of those relationships are the things they value the most.
Mm.
And where their regret lies is in relationships. So if
Wow.
we've spent X amount of our time being distracted, we're going to have a lot of regret. And this is your one beautiful, precious life.
Yes.
That pains me, you know?
Yes. I think if I remember, I've read it a couple of times, but it was a very well-known book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And he basically boils down humans find meaning in giving themselves to a cause bigger than themselves and suffering for something that they think is worth suffering for,
That's
which I
right.
think is really interesting, that suffering is such a big leg for the stool that he builds, and in
Yes.
meaningful, deep relationships where they can feel honest with other people. And I think too, sometimes I wonder if we really consider, like, what am I doing if my default activity with my spouse is to sit down next to them on the couch after a long day and both of us just scroll through our phones together.
Yeah.
And I've been guilty of it, of thinking that I was
Sure.
hanging out with my wife. It's not.
Yeah.
That is not hanging out with your spouse. That's not to
Yeah.
say you should never do that, or you should. I don't have an opinion on that, and I'm going to move us on from this. But I kind of wonder. I was curious if you've seen that show up in different ways. So that's really
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
I have a question for you that's a little bit of a different flavor. I remember when I got married, I got married pretty young. My wife and I were she was 19, I was 21.
Okay.
And so we've been married this is our 14th year. And I had somebody tell me this once, that they said if you add up the number of times that you have sex with your partner in the first year that you're together, that number will be greater than the cumulative number of times that you have sex throughout the rest of your relationship with them. That was a little bit of a depressing thought to me at the time. Uh, I'm, I'm curious, what is your take on that statement? And do you think that's healthy or true?
Well, it begs the question, Hamilton, are you having the kind of sex you want to have?
Mm,
Or are you just doing something over and over again because that's what you think you should do, or it's what you know, or because talking about it is too uncomfortable, or because you don't know, or you don't know yourself, right? I think when people give themselves permission to know themselves, to value their desire for connection and pleasure, their desire for, and that's what I would call sexuality. It's not, especially if you're talking to straight couples, it's not intercourse. If you can have bad intercourse, it's defeating the purpose, right? So connection and pleasure, if you've given yourself permission to be like, I believe that we both deserve good experiences of connection and pleasure together, then I've opened up the possibility to start talking about, well, what are all the ways we can do that?
yeah.
What are the ways that take 10 minutes? 20 minutes, a half an hour, 2 hours, a day, a weekend, whatever, and we start coming up with a kind of a menu
Mm,
of ways to enjoy intimacy with each other that we don't do with anyone else. I mean, if
yes.
you've agreed on a monogamous relationship, you don't do this with anyone else. And now there's room for play. There's room for not feeling well. There's room for being stressed out or whatever. And if you're going for good sex, that's what I would call good sex. If you're going for good sex, no, that does not have to be your bar at all. In fact, I'm like a big one, like try hugging for a minimum of 3 minutes. That's a long time in the kitchen
Yeah.
when there are kids and animals around.
Yeah.
And I'm always like, first, just pull that person into you and feel their body next to you. First minute, just notice they're there and drop your shoulders and emotionally, spiritually, body wise, get there. Set about here, get there. And in the second minute, synchronize your breathing. Breathe in at the same time, breathe out at the same time, or as one's breathing out, one breathes in, doesn't matter, but synchronize your breathing. Because what happens when you do that is your heart rates will synchronize, And then in that third minute, imagine that when you're breathing in your partner's love. And when you're breathing out, you're sending your love into your partner. And just do that for a whole minute. And then at around the time, the end of that, just don't say anything necessarily, but look at each other and say you love each other and that you're on the same team with your eyes. And I'm always like, if you've got kids or animals, they're going to be between you before
That's
you're done
right. That's
because
right.
that's where they want to be. And of course they want to be there. They want to be wherever love is. But it's also super important for kids to see that their parents are good, to see their marriage.
Yes.
Because we have research by Jim Medina at the University of Washington, where he looked at what are the factors that help children learn the best in school to absorb new cognitive information. And has to do with how quiet their brain is. In other words, if you're worried about home in any way, you have a white noise machine on in your brain and it's getting in the way of new information coming in. If they see that you're fine, you're good, you go out together, you tease each other, you hold each other, you giggle, you do whatever, you close your door and you say, can't come in yet, you got to knock, we're playing, we're having our time or whatever. Then kids start to feel like all is good on the home front.
Mm.
So I can just be me.
That's you. When you talked about two things I want to dial in on a little bit. One of them was you talked about having a menu. I think you used the word menu, but like 5-minute, 10-minute. So do you have like a literal menu? I'm just curious. Do you write this down? Are you writing down and laminating things as couples? Is that good best practice, or is this a mental menu? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, I'll often have couples, if they have a door in their room, to put a piece of butcher paper on the back side of the door and write like 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 2 hours like this. And, you can code it. take different color markers so that you know who's saying what. And
Yes.
then notice what each other really enjoys. Because
That's
again, if
awesome.
it's connection, lean toward each other,
Yes.
and create together. I'm always like, we don't eat the same thing for breakfast every single day our whole life, or dinner, or even lunch usually. Why in the world, in this very important place for connection and pleasure, which helps me feel good and hopeful and have energy for my life and for that which is more demanding, why do we like put it in this tiny little, and of course there's answers to this, but it just seems ridiculous that we put it in this tiny box and then we expect it to be fine. The reason that that number goes down, like you were talking about, like why so much in the first year and so little, is because it becomes boring, it becomes a task, it becomes obligatory and transactional. That kills desire. Well, desire is play. You can kill it. And so, yeah, of course, that's what happens. But that's what we do in the US because we don't offer other kinds of education, regularly.
I'm going to come back to that in a second. I want to ask you another question because I have more to add on that. But so let's say when you are in this kind of scenario where it has become boring, it has become a task to check off the list. Let's say you've been married for 40 years and you've basically gotten good patterns of living different lives in certain ways, right? You come together for the kids and do things. What are some of the root challenges that you see that manifest themselves as a lack of sex or a lack of good sex between a couple? Like, what are some of those root causes?
Both books that I wrote really get into how did America become sex negative? What role did the church play in that? What role has really colonizing and power and control played in that? And how has that led to people feeling shame, not feeling comfortable, not seeing how valuable they are, feeling not good enough, and then getting performative in their sexual relationship. And so I talk a lot about this is how we got here. It's not you.
Yeah.
And this is how you heal, and here's some ways to change that. And in the Shameless book, I literally go through what is the kind of emotional, relational, and body education children need, birth to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 6, up to 18, because people don't know. If you give a talk, chances are, or if you got a talk, it was too little and too late, or sometimes too late and too long, right? It was painful, right? And it's ineffective.
Yes.
But kids are needing specific things at each age. And so I had so many people say to me after the first book, I know I don't want to do to my kids what was done to me, but I don't know what to do. And I'm like, I got you. I will hold your hand literally and help you, go through this kind of a thing. So I think in many ways, it is the assumptions and the mythology that we have absorbed from our family of origins, our communities, and our friends and media that ends up being what trains our mind around what sex should be. And I put that in quotes. And it leads to, and people don't understand this, it leads to a diminished sex drive. And it leads to being critical of each other in particular ways. We don't understand each other. Women don't understand male sexuality and how it might be some ways different than theirs. And men don't understand women. And so this is where we see particular problems are in our straight couples,
Yes.
because they absorb this the most, and then they kind of bring it without question to each other. And that's why people like me have job security,
That's right.
but I don't want that. What I want is I would love for us to be like the Northern European countries and really supporting families and parents in giving their kids what they need at each step. Because what we learn when you do that is kids get involved with sex later, make safer sexual choices, pick people out of loving relationships versus just hooking up,
Yes.
actually, and they talk to their parents about it all the way through. There's a really delightful book called Not Under My Roof, which is written by Amy Shallett. And it is research where she talks to families in Holland, which has an excellent comprehensive sex education program, and the United States. And she's comparing and contrasting what these families say and what these kids, these adolescents and young adults say. And it's for people in America, it's shocking that there's a place in the world where kids are like talking every step of the way with their parents and the parents are talking with them. Like that feels so foreign, you know? But so I think that's a big one. And then the other thing I think of when you talk about people getting to be like 40 years, 40 years married and along and living parallel lives is they fell into roles and they stopped being people. When they fell in love, they were not falling in love with roles. They were falling in love with a person, right? There was something about that person that sparked them. When we become a parent, when we become an employee, when we become a husband and a wife, and that's a role, and we stop being people together, then the marriage itself as a organic entity is being starved. It's not being fed, right? We might be doing stuff out here with the kids, or we might be doing stuff at work or whatever. And again, culture does not support this, but the marriage, why did you guys get together in the first place? What do you like about each other? Do you do those things? Or do you go play? Do you remember, put yourself back together again? And, but if not, I'm always like, your marriage is a garden. And if you ignored it in the Pacific Northwest, it turns into a forest. Or if you're in a colder or whatever, drier place, it's going to turn into a desert. It's organic and needs to be attended to and fed apart from roles that you have in your life. Yeah.
Now, you talked about kind of bouncing back to the second part of what you talked about when you're comparing the book that contrasted Holland. I think it was Holland. You mentioned Holland in the US.
Holland and the US.
So I'm going to take it you're not a big fan of having the talk one time.
Not always, but often.
I think that's great, though. I mean, I've seen that so I grew up in a pretty religious, conservative Bible Belt, and I'm not here to talk bad about my upbringing. I think everybody who was involved in my upbringing was doing the very best that they could.
Absolutely.
And I think they did a great job. But a lot of times you get one conversation, and outside of that, everything you learn about sex is either from the media, your peers, or in my case, from like breakout sessions at youth retreats where the guys
say youth group. Yeah.
The guys go one way and they learn don't look at pornography. And the women learn that it is your fault if a man looks at you and
desires you
sexually. You must have done something to cause him to stumble.
Right. You showed your shoulder.
A lot of great people who are in those environments who are leading that message, but a lot of really bad things come from that, I feel like, a lot of times. And a lot of repression.
And a lot of fear and a sense of shame, and I'm happy to share this if you would like to hear it, or if you think your audience would like to hear it.
Share away. I love to hear all the sharing.
We did not do any research on sexual shame. So we all know about Brene Brown. She did beautiful work on shame and has made shame really a household word. But it was 2017 where we finally published the very first piece of research, getting an operational definition on what sexual shame is. Sexual shame. So shame itself is who I feel like I am at my core. I feel like that I was taught that was bad. Okay. And so really that tends to happen when kids are really little and they do something that's very typical of a 2-year-old, 1-year-old, 3-year-old, 5-year-old. They do something very typical of that age and somebody comes down really hard on them or gets scary in their face or something. And they don't really understand what they're getting in trouble for. So the only meaning they can make is something must be wrong with me, with who I am, right? And this actually starts, if you think about sexuality or our bodies or pleasure, right? It starts for an infant when they're about 11 months old and they find their genitals for the first time. So you might remember that with your little ones, right? They're getting their diapers changed or they're in the tub or whatever, and they find their genitals. I always say it's the best day in their life so far. Like that is a great day because they have this part of their body that feels amazing to touch, right? And of course, they're all about pleasure. Yes. They're all about desire when they're little. Their left brain isn't even online until language comes when they're almost 2, right?
That's right.
So, they are putting sand in their mouth and they're touching things. They've got the bunny's ear on their face at night. It's all about pleasure. It's all about connection and pleasure. So what they need at that point is somebody to go, yep, that's your penis. It's a wonderful part of you. Let's finish putting your diaper on. Or, yep, that's your vulva. It's a wonderful part of you. Labeling. That's what we
Yes.
do when they're really little. We label the world for them.
Yes.
But if instead they begin to get the, don't, gross, that's dirty, and they get the hand slapped away or whatever. And then that happens over and over and over again because the kids don't stop doing that until they're like 3 or 4. And then they start to realize, oh, I get in trouble when I do that, and I can go to my room, or I can whatever. Yes. And so it's happened hundreds of times. And so way back before we can remember, 95% of people in the US who had homes that were silent or silent and shaming had people on them about their body pleasure curiosities from their earliest memories or before they even remember, and it's deeply seated inside of them. And so then if you layer on top of that messages about desire and sexuality being dangerous, that it's going to separate you from God, it's going to separate you from your future, the future you could have, things like this, and you are a precious little 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds, you're pre-adolescent, it's deeply seated in you. And so when this research came out, I felt like I was seeing for the first time in black and white what I'd been seeing in people's lives over and over and over again. And really what took me to do this research was watching the impact on my graduate students and my clients. Because beginning in the year 2000 or so, I started to see this dramatic increase in humiliation and disgust about themselves and their bodies, hatred, feeling like perverts. They had very little understanding about what was developmentally common to be curious about. And they just had so much self-hatred. And I'm like, oh my God, I think this is one of the most beautiful gifts you're given as a human, because it's how to use your body to show love,
yes.
Right? To bring someone close. And we have made that bad and dangerous for you. So in the research, I'll read you this definition because I think it's really important. And a lot of people in the US experience this, and there isn't enough to combat it. Sexual shame is a visceral feeling. So it's in your body. It's not just cognitive. It's in your body, of humiliation and disgust toward one's own body and identity as a sexual being, and a belief of being abnormal, inferior, and unworthy. So if you think about that in light of what you learn in church, this is opposite.
Heavy.
We're actually hurting you at the place where you are most tender. This feeling can be internalized, but it also manifests in interpersonal relationships, which is where it begins, infant and caregiver, right? Having a negative impact on trust, communication, and physical and emotional intimacy. So we have now hurt the human in the place that they are most tender and the place where they have the capacity to build safe, loving relationships, which is directly tied to happiness and longevity.
When you were reading that off, I thought to myself, like, this is truly like a double-edged sword, because not only are you robbing an individual of a very important way for them to have connection with other humans and to have fun doing it, which, whether you're introvert or not, we all need connection with each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're not only robbing them of that, but you're also giving them some really dark thoughts about themselves. So you're putting someone in isolation, and also being like, the only person who you can really be yourself with is yourself, and you're disgusting.
Right.
And that's a really dark place to be as a person.
It is.
That leads people to a lot of really unhealthy decisions.
Yes.
Everything from their diet to, self-harm, drugs, things like that can really be the result of, like, well, and God forbid if you were like the victim of a sexual assault and you also believe that you were the cause of it because you showed your shoulder, and you're also bad for having these feelings.
Right.
Like that's a recipe. Like, how do we not have more problems of teenagers and young people making really, really bad decisions because they can't connect with people and they think it's their fault?
Well, we do. The loss of moral compass in our culture has everything to do with the fact that we have not taught children and modeled for children how you develop close, intimate relationships, what your responsibility is, what you're not responsible for, how to do kindness, how to do, just all the different pieces that we need to be teaching. We don't do that Instead, we download this sense that you're unworthy of love and belonging, right? And nobody is going to want you because you're disgusting, right? And then we provide exploitation at every turn, right? We're exploiting women, we're exploiting products, people, music, name it, right? And so now I feel terrible about myself. And so I don't have the moral compass inside of me to choose better because I don't believe I deserve it. I'm going to choose these other things. So I would say, and as somebody who sits in quiet rooms with people that and have had intimate conversations with students, people for, over 30 years, almost 40 years, that there is so much suffering in our world that stems to the fact that people believe they are unworthy and no one could possibly love them. And so they put a mask on and they perform their life out of that mask. So when true love comes at them, they don't believe they deserve it, they deflect it. And when they want to give love out, they don't believe their love is worthy either. And so they don't. And so now we've put a huge, beam, 8x8 beam between people. And then we expect them to be able to, invest in their community or invest in a partner, invest in their children. But instead, we've got all these people out performing in order to get more affirmation because they have a cup. If you imagine, they have a ceramic cup inside of them that has a huge hole in the bottom. So good stuff comes in and it just goes straight through because there's nothing there. And I think this is why I think my work went in this direction. I think people who have been brought up around faith and a sense that they are beloved of God and chosen by name, when they are taught this instead, we've now made it almost impossible for them to truly bring in how incredible they really are, how chosen they really are.
Yeah.
And yet we did it under family values. Like we did all this stuff. We did abstinence education under the guise of family values. And if you do your research into that, beginning in the 80s, it didn't have to do with that. It had to do with growing corporate wealth. But we needed the religious vote. And so we started actually spewing what was not true and scaring people. And we're seeing the fallout of that in my book. And to me, it's heartbreaking because what I get the most joy out of is watching people have authentic relationships and feel like they can bring their humanity to each other. And the person says, I love you anyway. It's okay. We're all on a road. We're all radically valuable and radically imperfect. You're on a journey. It's okay. I am too, and you see that kind of love and compassion. And that brings me so much joy because I know it matters.
It matters hugely. Let's say you've got a couple early to mid 60s, empty nesters. She maybe stayed home for part of their marriage and raised kids, maybe worked part-time, and he probably traveled a lot for work Tuesday through Thursday. So a very common profile. Hamilton, we were getting ready to retire next year. They usually come to me for basically being a big calculator that spits out a simplified checklist. But a lot of times these folks are, in my mind, the biggest questions, the hardest questions for them to answer are not the financial questions. You're leaving a career that you had all your social infrastructure and your relationships. So how are you going to retire to purpose? What are you retiring to? Not just how much can you spend or how should your investments be, but like what is the next Frodo destroyed the ring. What does he do next when he goes back to the Shire? Right? So what happens after that? And for that's maybe on an individual level, but on a couple level, what are some steps that they can take to dust off the embers of what they made them first fall in love and really start to tackle the golden years of their retirement as people who are having good sex and connecting with each other and having fun and maybe relearning some communication patterns that have gotten stale?
Yeah.
I'm the king of giving like a 4-minute question to somebody and then just being like, go. So sorry.
Love it, though. This is great because you can tell I don't do quick answers either because I tend to think in the big picture of it all. Love that you asked the question, how do you retire to purpose? And I think that's really important for both people. If you're going to move, and what do you want to feel meaningful to you? If you think about this as the last chapter of your life, and hopefully it's long and healthy, but what do you want to feel good about in this time? individually, but then let's also talk collectively. I think when you talk about dusting off the embers, it's really, we've been talking really about this. How well have they done staying connected to each other, remembering each other, remembering their coupleness? If it's been 20 years, if they did kids and career pretty, and maybe church involvement, and that's kind of it, they didn't do this, maybe there's a lot of healing that needs to happen. Maybe there's a lot of, I think we need help talking through that baby we lost. Or I think we need help because I didn't feel your support and I know you think you gave me your support, or whatever the deal is. So sometimes it's get involved in some couples counseling for a time. Give yourself that gift of being like, we need to do some house cleaning of some ways in which we didn't care for our marriage in the last couple of decades or the last decade or whatever. And we have some pain points. We need to hear each other, to hear and say, I'm sorry that was your experience and that I played a role in that. I'm really sorry. It's not what I wanted. What is there anything I can do now? Like learning how to repair. So do some of that stuff. Then I would say start talking about what sounds like fun to you. Do you like to travel? Do you like to see how people live in other parts of the world? Do you like adventure? Are there places where you can come together? I have a husband who's 71. He teaches skiing, right? I don't go skiing with him. I go up and play with the kids or the grandkids or whatever, but like, dude, you do your double black diamonds and have a great time, right? We're not going to do everything together, but we do have to find those things that are fun for us and then begin to plan for how we're going to actually do that and keep evaluating. In business, you learn to kind of do a post-mortem after a kind of thing, like look at it. How did it go? Do that. Go on a trip you've wanted to go on, and then be like, what worked and what didn't? What would we change next time? Because you're learning how to do retirement together and you're learning how to do this time in your life together. And maybe knees aren't as great as they used to be, or hips aren't as great, but get into the mode of creating together joy.
That's awesome. What a great note to end on. That. My last parting question, Dr. Tina, is for my listeners who would like to learn more about you and your work. What's the best way for them to connect with you or to learn more about what you've written?
Yeah. So both my books you can get on Amazon. If you are somebody who's not supporting Amazon, which I know some people aren't, that's completely fine. Just take the titles, and you'll probably put them in the show notes. Take your titles to a bookseller and ask them to order it for you. I want to say, and I try to say this every time that I'm doing a podcast, if you have any listener out there who's like, I know I suffered sexual shame growing up. I know it's been in there all this time. I would really like to heal from it. And they want to read the book, Sex, God, and the Conservative Church, Erasing Shame from Sexual Intimacy. And they can't afford it, let's say. Or they're like, I want to like raise the part of me that never got enough of the stuff I needed. I'm going to do the Shameless Parenting book, but I'm going to like do it like I'm going to read it to my toddler within myself. And then I'm going to read it to my 4-year-old. And I'm, and I'm going to help heal and give myself what I never got. Again, I had people who loved me, but they didn't know how to do this, but if you want one or both of the books and you cannot afford them, I don't want you to feel like you can't do this particular work. All you need to do is DM me at Dr. Tina Shameless. That's my Instagram, DRTINA Shameless. And let me know a little bit about your situation and what book, or if you want both of them. And I will send you a promo code for an audio version of either book or both of them if you want both of them. But you need to like write and let me know, because these books will help you understand and help you heal and give you steps to integrate a new sexuality and spirituality together that feels right to you. And it will also grow you up from all those little parts of you that still hold pain from how you grew up, again, with people who loved you, but people who didn't know better. And in a culture that was making products more important than people. And that's had an effect on all of our corporate self-esteem. Right. And so if you want to do the work, you can reach me there. You can go to tinaschermersellers.com. There's a bunch of free stuff on my website. There's also handouts for teachers and doctors and clergy to use with parents and people that are like growing up. Like, here's what the 15 to 18-year-old is like, and here's what they need from you. Here's what might be hard for you. Here's the top resources out there. And that's a literal handout that you can. So I've got just a ton of stuff. Yeah. So people can reach me all kinds of ways, and I'm happy to help.
That's also super generous of you. And I downloaded that PDF this morning before our call. I was like, man, this is great. This will be some cool talking points with my wife because we have 4 kids. So
Yeah.
So that's exciting. Well, thank you again, Dr. Tina, for your time, for your expertise. I really appreciate it. And I hope you have a fantastic day. I hope we have you on again sometime.
Yeah. Thanks again, Hamilton. This was a lot of fun. Thanks.
This show reflects the personal opinions and viewpoints of myself, Hamilton Brandenburg, and my guests. Opinions and viewpoints are subject to change at any time without notice. No representation is made as to the accuracy, completeness, or relevance of the information presented. The information discussed is general in nature and does not constitute investment, tax, or legal advice, so consult with your tax, legal, and financial professionals about your specific situation. Past performance does not indicate future returns, and any indices mentioned are for reference and cannot be invested in directly. Brandenburg Financial Services is a DBA of CS Planning, an SEC-registered investment advisor.